It happened in the middle of my shift. We were working on the scaffolding for a new office building downtown. I'd been doing this kind of work for a couple of years, mostly hauling materials, tying rebar, basic stuff. It wasn't anything special, but it paid the bills. I don't remember the exact moment. One second I was carrying a bundle of steel rods across the site. The next, everything went black. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. The nurse told me I'd been hit in the head by a falling piece of equipment, a broken winch or something. It didn't really matter. All I knew was that my head felt like it had been split open, and everything around me was too bright and too loud. The doctor came in later, said it was a concussion, and that I'd need to take time off. He mentioned some other things too, possible long-term effects, stuff about rest and recovery, but I didn't really take it in. I was just thinking about how I was going to pay rent. A week later, I got approved for workers' comp. It wasn't much, but it covered the basics. I figured I'd be fine as long as I followed the doctor's orders and stayed home for a while. At first it wasn't so bad. I'd sleep in, watch TV, and scroll through my phone until I got bored. My head still hurt if I moved too fast, but the painkillers helped with that. The real problem started when I stopped sleeping. It wasn't like I wasn't tired. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling my body ache with exhaustion, but sleep just wouldn't come. I'd close my eyes, and it was like my brain didn't know how to shut off. The first few nights, I thought it was just the concussion messing with me. I tried taking the pills the doctor gave me, but they didn't do anything. I bought melatonin gummies from the drugstore. Same thing. By the end of the first week, I'd start to drift off, but then I'd jerk awake like I was falling. It got to the point where I didn't even bother going to bed anymore. I'd just sit on the couch all night, flipping through channels or watching YouTube videos on my phone. The weird stuff started on the fourth or fifth night without sleep. I was in the kitchen, making toast because I figured eating something might help, and I thought I saw someone standing in the hallway. It was just out of the corner of my eye. When I turned, there was nothing there. I told myself it was just my brain playing tricks on me, that I was overtired and imagining things. But after that, I started seeing them more often. By the second week, the figures weren't just flashes anymore. I'd see them standing in the corners of rooms or at the edge of my vision, just out of focus. They never moved, at least not while I was looking directly at them, but I couldn't shake the feeling they were watching me. On top of that, the lack of sleep was causing me to feel really scared. On one hand, I wasn't nearly as tired as I should have been, but on the other, I knew how bad it was to be going this long without sleep. One night, I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels, when I saw one of them in the reflection of the TV. It was taller than a person should be, its head almost brushing the ceiling. It didn't have a face, just a kind of empty blackness where one should be. I turned around fast, and for a split second I saw it actually standing there, but then I blinked, and it was gone. I started leaving the lights on. Every room, every corner of the apartment lit up. I even left the bathroom light on, just in case. It didn't really help, but it felt better than sitting in the dark. Then the noises started. Faint tapping sounds, like fingers on a window or knuckles against the wall. I'd check, of course. I'd walk the whole apartment with my phone's flashlight, but there was never anything there. I also started hearing what sounded like children whispering to each other. but I couldn't make out the words. But the worst was this weird giggling noise, like someone laughing at me. It didn't happen as often as the tapping sound, but when it did, the hairs on my arms would stand up, and panic would rise from my stomach into my chest. I tried telling myself it was the neighbors, maybe people outside, but I knew it wasn't. The walls were thin, but I'd lived here long enough to know what normal noise sounded like. By the third week, I was starting to lose track of time. The days all blended together. I'd wake up, or more accurately, stand up, from whatever surface I'd collapsed on, and try to figure out if it was morning or afternoon. I stopped checking my phone because it didn't matter. The figures were around more often now. I'd catch them standing in the kitchen, in the hallway, or by the window. Always still, always watching. Once I tried walking straight toward one, just to prove to myself it wasn't real. As I got closer, it seemed to shrink, folding into itself until it disappeared completely. It was like watching something get sucked down a drain. It didn't make any sense. I called the doctor and told him I wasn't sleeping, that the pills weren't doing anything. He said I was probably experiencing post-concussion insomnia and that it would pass. When I mentioned the figures, he paused for a second before telling me they were probably hypnagogic hallucinations. He said, "It's nothing to worry about. Eventually your body will crash." I hung up. That night, I saw something new. I was lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling, when I noticed a faint light floating in the corner of the room. At first, I thought it was a reflection from my phone screen, but when I sat up, it didn't move. It hovered there, shifting slightly like it was breathing. Whispering sounds filled the room. I wanted to touch it, but my body wouldn't move. When it finally faded away, I felt cold all over, like I'd been standing outside in the snow. By the end of the month, it was hard to tell what was real and what wasn't. I'd catch myself talking to people who weren't there, full-on conversations, then realize I'd been alone the whole time. My reflection started looking distorted, like my face didn't quite match what I thought it should. The figures weren't staying in the corners anymore. They'd get closer, close enough that I could see how they flickered, like shadows from a candle flame. I saw faces in plants and patterns on the walls. Their eyes would lock onto mine, and their faces would shift into contorted smiles or expressions of pain. The giggling noise was happening more often now, too. One night, I was standing in the kitchen, staring into the fridge even though I wasn't hungry. I felt something behind me, close enough to touch. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My whole body froze. When I finally worked up the nerve to move, the air felt heavy, like someone had just walked past me. I stopped trying to sleep after that. Not that I was really trying before, but now I didn't even lie down. It didn't feel safe. The light orbs were showing up more often. They weren't peaceful, like I'd first thought. One floated across the room while I was sitting on the floor, and as it passed me, I felt this sharp stabbing pain in my chest. It was gone as fast as it came, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it had taken something from me. The worst happened a few nights later. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard someone crying. It wasn't faint or muffled. It sounded like a woman, sitting just a few feet away from me. I asked if someone was there. My voice came out shaky, almost a whisper. The crying stopped. Then, from the direction of the kitchen, I heard my name. It was quiet, but unmistakable. It sounded almost gentle, like the way my mom used to wake me up for school. I got up slowly, my legs feeling like they might give out, and walked toward the voice. The kitchen was empty, but the fridge door was wide open, spilling light onto the floor. The shadow of a person stretched across the tiles, but there was no one there to cast it. I stood there for a long time, staring at the shadow, waiting for it to move. When it finally did, it moved toward me. I don't remember what happened next. When I came to, I was lying on the floor in the middle of the living room. The lights were still on, every single one, but the room felt darker somehow. I sat up, my head pounding. It was hard to focus on anything. The edges of the room looked blurry, like the walls were too far away. Then I saw them. The shadow figures were everywhere, lined up along the walls, standing in the doorway, some crouched on the floor. Their shapes were clearer now, less like blobs and more like people, but wrong. Their arms were too long, and their heads tilted at angles that made my stomach turn. And now they all had faces that looked like horrific, shifting masks. Their expressions would change rapidly between laughing to screaming in pain or terror. The giggling had become a wall of echoing laughter and wailing. The shadows stretched and warped, towering over me, and then disappearing into cracks in the walls, only to reappear in a different spot. The light orbs floated between them, flickering like candle flames. One of them hovered close to me. Then I watched as it passed straight through my chest, but I didn't see it leave the other side. My body went cold. I started to shake. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out, and I dropped back to the floor. The shadows went quiet, and then started whispering. Hundreds of different voices, overlapping and circling around me. Some were angry, hissing, while others were softer, almost comforting, but with an undertone of pure hostility. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but one word kept cutting through the noise. My name. The shadows moved closer, growing and warping around me. One of them stretched out an arm, and I swore I felt its fingers brush against my shoulder. The cold spread through me like ice water. I closed my eyes, hoping it would all stop, but the whispers got louder. The shadows were right next to me now. I could feel the air shift around me, heavy and wrong, like the room itself was closing in. Then, the crying started again. It was louder this time, a woman's voice, sobbing somewhere behind me. I opened my eyes and turned, and there she was. She looked almost human, but her face was blurred, like a photo that hadn't finished loading. Her hands were outstretched, and her mouth moved, but I couldn't hear her words over the crying. The shadows froze, all of them turning toward her. The whispering stopped. She stepped closer, her hand reaching out, and I felt something crack in my chest. It wasn't pain exactly, but it felt like something inside me was breaking, falling apart piece by piece. I couldn't move anymore. My body felt heavy, like I was sinking into the floor. She touched my face, and for the first time in weeks, everything went silent. Then, everything went black. I woke up in a hospital bed. The room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of a heart monitor. My throat was dry, and my arms felt like they'd been filled with lead. A nurse walked in, noticed I was awake, and called for the doctor. When he came in, he told me I'd collapsed from exhaustion. 37 days without real sleep. He kept saying how lucky I was to be alive, how most people would have died or fallen into a coma long before then. He said the injury to my head probably saved me. He didn't ask about the figures or the voices. They kept me there for a few days, monitoring my vitals and trying to get me to eat. The first night, I finally slept. Deep, dreamless sleep that felt like being dragged underwater. When I woke up, I thought maybe it was over. But then, on the second night, I saw it again. It started as a tiny flash in the corner of the room, just outside the light from the hallway. A shadow, tall and thin, standing perfectly still. I closed my eyes and told myself it wasn't real, that it was just my brain playing tricks on me. When I opened them again, the shadow was gone, but the feeling wasn't. Now that I'm home, it's the same. I try not to think about it too much, but I still see them sometimes. Just little things. Movement in the corners. Faint whispers when I'm alone. The doctor said it was all in my head, a side effect of extreme sleep deprivation. Maybe they're right.